Even my good friend Shari, in Breaking the Silence, it's got the word disturbances. When former President Mugabe commissioned the Chambakwe Commission, he called it the disturbances in Matabeleland, Commission of Inquiry into the disturbances in Matabeleland. And words have meaning. Disturbances from a legal perspective has a meaning, and I will explain. I'm also a criminal lawyer. I'm an international criminal lawyer. So I was looking at it from a perspective of international criminal law, international law, including our law in Zimbabwe, just trying to understand Kukraondi much better. And hopefully intending for whatever findings I come up with to contribute to a more meaningful discussion and debate. Not to say this is it. What I've said, I've found is the ultimate truth or alpha and omega, no, but to say this is something else that people might take into account as they discuss and they debate this issue of Kukraondi. So like I said, everything has a name, and names matter. But let's get out of the way the elephant in the room, which is, in the past week, something quite interesting happened regarding Kukraondi. I'm not going to talk about resolving Kukraondi because I don't think I have those answers at this point. But let's just get out of our way the more interesting developments. Last week there was a big consultation. In fact, the consultation has been going on for some time, and the government has taken a position that the Kukraondi is going to be addressed via the chiefs. I must confess that I've had some skepticism about it. I've said it before. But, when you are so close to a problem, so close to an issue, sometimes you might not really see your own biases, right? You want to sometimes take a step back and think and reflect. And if I was in Kosovo, is where I've been, if I was in East Timor, if I was in Sierra Leone, wherever other countries, I may approach this in a different way because I'm not intimately affected by it, right? But Kukraondi I am. So one always has to find a way of curbing one's own instincts about things that happen. And it's a very difficult thing because we all have our biases, and our biases are come out of our own experiences. I'm sure many of you here would have, directly or indirectly, have lost a relative to Kukraondi, which implicitly means you are invested in the topic and subject, and you have views. So in the past week, I followed the process of the chiefs and the president. He came down and unveiled this national consultative process, which will be led by the chiefs. My initial criticism when the decision was made to ask the chiefs to deal with it was that, well, what are they dealing with? What are the chiefs being asked to deal with? This was my question. What are they being asked to address? What are they being asked to resolve? Are we resolving people who quarreled, which chiefs do all the time in the village? Somebody came, slept with my wife, the chief will bring you. Did you do it? Yes, I did it. They will charge you a cow maybe, or somebody's cattle has done, somebody's cattle have come into my field, or even to more fundamental problems that happen in society. Chiefs are the custodians of power and authority in our communities. And quite rightly so. Their mandate is very broad and varied. Chiefs, everything goes to the chief in the village. But there are things that chiefs can't resolve. Criminal cases, the chiefs have no jurisdiction, right? A chief cannot resolve a murder, no matter that it happens in his own village. He has got no jurisdiction over it because there are laws that say that certain things that happen must be processed in a particular way. So So my initial criticism was, you are giving chiefs a responsibility to resolve things that we have not yet fully defined, but which, on the face of it, constitute crimes. Right? That was my initial criticism, that look, we all know, yes, broadly speaking, we had Kukuraundi, but implicit in the Kukuraundi were murders. There were rapes. There was burning of hearts and houses. There was torture. And you're saying chiefs must resolve this. This is even against our own constitution. That was my view. The Criminal Code, the Criminal Procedure and Evidence Act, it's quite clear who resolves these issues and how they are resolved. So that was my criticism of the process. I said, but I have great respect for my chiefs. And I mean, I also have a chief whom I hugely respect. But I was, it's also putting a lot of unnecessary pressure on the chiefs. The expectations that are being loaded on them to resolve Kukuraundi are too much. Do they even have the capability and the capacity? I mean, I'm a lawyer, and I've defended many people accused of some of these crimes in my previous life. And I know how complex and complicated it is to deal with atrocity, right? I last time when I was here, I spoke about some people I defended, some of these militia commanders back in East Timor, who committed unspeakable atrocities. I mean, you can't even believe human beings can do that. I mean, burning people in churches, killing hundreds, 200 people in 20, 30 minutes, literal bloodbaths. And the reality of it is that some of what happened in Matabeleland and the Midlands is just that, right? We had heinous crimes that happened. So my initial skepticism, which still obtains, was, can we seriously entrust chiefs to resolve Kukuraundi? I don't believe that chiefs alone can resolve Kukuraundi, for the reasons I've stated. But I believe chiefs have a critical role to play towards resolving Kukuraundi. And I'm going to say, because I've had to adjust my own thinking and my own analysis, because not all good things go together. Not all good things have to go together. You can have a good thing over there going on its own, another one over there going on its own, as with bad things. So I've had time to reflect a bit, and I said, okay, fine. As I saw the latest developments, and I have many colleagues here who have played a critical part in trying to push forward processes that will help address Kukuraundi, not resolve it at this stage, address Kukuraundi. I have my friend Hussein here, Reverend, and Chari, and others who've been working with the chiefs. And I believe we still have an opportunity there. I think there is an opportunity there. And the reason is simply this, in my own opinion, having already said that I don't believe that unless you have named this animal called Kukuraundi properly and you understand and appreciate it, then it will lead you to what needs to happen, right? So if implicit in Kukuraundi were crimes, then there has to be a process that addresses the fact that there were crimes. And that's a process that's beyond and outside what normally powers of a chief would have. So would it be a statute that then says, for all crimes that happened in villages between 1983 January and 1987, chiefs have jurisdiction? Because we're now fundamentally tinkering with the criminal code and the criminal law of the country as well. And what are then the parameters of that? So there are a lot of issues that still remain unclear, right? Even about this process of asking the chiefs to address. But there are some good things. I'm sure people out there, including some of my friends in government who feel I never give him any credit, are wondering, is he okay today? that he can say there's something good that's come from government. I mean, I think if something is good, something is good. I think there are great opportunities here. One thing people don't understand is that Kukuraundi was never appropriately documented. It wasn't. We all talk about it in hushed tones. In the villages, people are scared to talk. People are scared. They're afraid. The closest to documenting, and I say this having spent the past 24 months doing my research, the primary source document for Kukuraundi is breaking the silence. And breaking the silence from an even academic perspective, even though I contributed as a young researcher to it, is not that great. It's a great report. It's a report. I have to stress this. It's a report. And I'm not undermining its value because it's a report based on first-hand accounts of victims, documented at the time by very courageous, absolutely courageous missions. Pumula Mission, Lupane, St. Luke's. What's the one in Matopo? The church. Minda, and a whole lot of other people that were there, political elements, there were civil society elements, people like Shari there. And what Breaking the Silence brilliantly does is it captures those accounts as they were happening, but it doesn't analyze them. It doesn't analyze them. It doesn't say what they are. It doesn't say I mean, I think Shari did a brilliant process of trying to also show patterns, but it doesn't really analyze. It captures it and puts it in one place. But it has there are fundamental limitations of Breaking the Silence. It restricted to a small geographic area. I think it was 2 districts, right? 2 districts in Matabeleland. 2 out of how many? Matabele is 29 districts, am I right? Those of you who work in rural Matabeleland. 29? Is it 29? How many districts are Matabeleland? There's no aspiring politician here. Okay, but anyway, so we're 23 I hear. So now imagine Breaking the Silence goes into it's very in-depth though. When you look at it didn't spare any thing that happened in Cholocho. It didn't. Very extensive, and I mean Shari would say what aspects might have been left, but all the villages, if you read Breaking the Silence, you will see every village. You can literally see from January as they progress, March, April, you can see them moving across Cholocho, village by village by village, moving across, going around there. And then you see in 1983 or 84 when they moved to Balagwe, you then see them moving around that area. But it's just 2 districts, 2, Matobo and Cholocho. What Breaking the Silence, and Breaking Silence also talks about other violations. Stops Camp, for example. Stops Camp was a holding camp, and this was in Bulawayo. So it also captures disappearances that happened in Bulawayo. But you're not going to get too much about Plumtree. You won't get too much about Beitbridge and other places and things that happened elsewhere. So I don't want to make too much of my point around that we have never been able to effectively and comprehensively document what happened. We have not been able to do that. And people get so excited when people say, 20,000 people plus died. Now, for the first time, people come back and say, but Sipho, why are you saying 20,000? Breaking the Silence. You yourself keep talking about break. It says only 3,000. I say, what the hell are you talking about? In 2 weeks, Breaking the Silence says 2,000 people were killed. In 2 weeks. Within 2 weeks of arriving in Cholocho, the Kukuraundi killed 2,000 people. Do the math. If in January, by February, mid-February, they'd killed 2,000, Kukuraundi continued until 1987. Do your math. And nothing stopped them from killing. So you can do your math, and if you do your math, it's going to take you to hundreds of thousands of people, possibly, right? So you have to be careful how you want to weaponize breaking the silence, because it might not necessarily be the weapon that you need. So ultimately, when we reckon with the reality, is that the numbers may not be known. The numbers may not be known, but breaking the silence gives you a window, a picture, a sense of what those numbers might have been. Of course, we all know that the most brutal wave was January 1983, the entire 1983. We know that that was the most brutal wave. And that's when you had the massacres in Swale, in Konyeni, in Sloane. And that's where you even have, I quote this in one of my papers that's just about to be published in the African Yearbook of International Humanitarian Law. I quote a statement by one of the perpetrators when he arrived, and he said, "We have been sent here to kill everyone. We are to leave nothing but trees." And this is in 1983. So we accept that breaking the silence, a very useful source document based on primary witnesses and evidence that were there, the priests, the victims themselves, but it doesn't capture the full scope and breadth of what happened. It doesn't capture everything. The other report is by Lawyers Committee for Human Rights, Bill Buckley. He came here around 1983. He came here for a short time first, then he went and came back for 3 months, and he also went the rounds. And the fascinating, that report, the difference between that report and breaking the silence is that Bill Buckley had the opportunity of interviewing government officials. So in Bill Buckley's report, it's called Wages of War, a human rights report, Lawyers Committee for Human Rights. And I've taken time to analyze that report, and the difference is that he was now he picked up a lot on what Breaking Silence hadn't been published, by the way, at that point. So this is a source document coming from the time, but of course at the time it was two, three white people come from America who were doing interviews, and they had more room to maneuver, mind you. It was a different time, so they didn't have the constraints of going around, even though it was quite a difficult time. And the most fascinating thing is when you read Wages of War, is that you actually see what the government views were about some of the things that were happening. It's a fascinating report. Unfortunately, I struggled to even find it. You can't even buy it on Amazon. I had to find it using other means. And I think it's just an important source for people who want to know what happened, because it also gives you the insights of government officials, because he literally was going to talk to government officials. For example, about disappearances, he interviewed the then Minister of State Security, who was our current president. And I don't recall whether he was able to talk to the president at the time. But there's so many things on record, things that government officials were responding to on record. Those are the two reports that are publicly available on Kukuraundi, just those two. There were other reports that we are told nobody knows where they are, Chiambakwe and Tumbuchena reports. Tumbuchena focused on Tumbane. It wasn't focused on Kukraundi. It was focused on Tumbane. But the Chiambakwe report was Chiambakwe Commission actually came and met people and had meetings in town, went to the villages, but then the reports were never published. And I'm sure that if that report was published, it would give a much clearer story. It would complete some of the gaps. So this brings me to this process. What I think is a great opportunity about this process by the government. It gives us an opportunity for people to speak about what happened to them in their own villages. It's a wonderful opportunity to document Kukraundi as comprehensively as possible. I know you'll all say, oh, no, the government will never allow it. But if we are finally having processes in the villages, every village, remember I said Kukraundi focused on 2 districts. This process is all districts, right? So we are hopefully going to finally hear what happened everywhere else, despite our skepticism about the authenticity, the credibility, the sincerity of the government as perpetrator, come now resolver of the issue. It's an opportunity. It's a glass half full or is the glass half empty? It's the same thing, right? You may want to make a decision about whether it's half full or half empty. But I'm saying that what we don't have is a full account of what happened across Matabeleland and the Midlands. And I know that the process has recommended that they will start off with Matabeleland and then they'll go to the Midlands. So that's a good thing. And one has to then figure out how one makes that good thing a great thing. For the first time, there may be an opportunity for people who have never had the opportunity to speak, and for the chiefs to hear them and to document their stories and their pain and their loss. That's the beginning of a process. It's not the end. So the chiefs are not going to resolve Kukraundi. They are going to facilitate the resolution of Kukraundi. That's my understanding of how we are looking at this. The chiefs are not going to say, okay, so your father was killed. Okay, so fine. That's okay. I've resolved this. You can go home now. They are going to say, from my village, I have 400 people who lost relatives. These are the people they lost. These are the homesteads they lost. This is their livestock they lost. This is the suffering they endured. That's a documentation of the process. I hope, this is my own excited expectation about this process, when I'm not deciding to be very negative about it and say, no. Because I've also done the legal analysis, remember. So I can tell you when I've done the legal analysis, I know what needs to happen legally. I can tell you that straight away. But I also appreciate that one has to be very careful about taking a very privileged position about what must happen. And I've been in situations where we were having legal processes alongside non-legal reconciliation processes. For example, when we were in East Timor, in Rwanda, we had a legal process, International Criminal Tribunal in Rwanda, alongside non-legal community-led reconciliation justice processes, the Kachacha. Some of you might have heard it. So that's why I said not all good things go together, right? Good things can happen over there and something good can happen over there, as long as they don't take away from each other. So I see and I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussions. I know there's a debate later this evening on this document. But if people are allowed to speak freely, if chiefs are able to manage this process of allowing the people to speak, and technical support is provided to document what is happening, we might get a much clearer and better story of Kukuraundi than we currently have. We have a story of Kukuraundi. With the story we have is enough for us to draw conclusions, by the way. I'm not saying that without the chief's process we don't, legally the analysis is sufficient. But we're talking about reaching people here, enabling people to speak, and documenting what happened. And then on the basis of that documentation, then deciding what needs to happen. So this is why this is the glimmer of hope in my moment of optimism that I see about this process. Of course, we all know that there's a huge difference between an intention and an outcome. We also know that there's a huge difference between what somebody says they are doing and what somebody is actually doing. We've seen this so many times. And of course, the most important thing is that we are very skeptical. Why are we skeptical? Because the government that is initiating and managing this process is the government that committed the atrocities. We have every reason to be skeptical. But we must also accept that we can't have it all. We cannot say to the government, resolve Kukuraundi, and then say, you can't resolve Kukuraundi. I hope you're hearing what I'm saying. You can't say, President Mnangagwa, resolve Kukuraundi. And then he says, okay, I'm resolving. He says, no, but you can't. You are the one who was involved. So there has to be a way to navigate this complexity. And for me, as a legal person, it's a very clear thing to me, right? The clear thing is this. The responsibility and accountability at a legal level is both state and individual. I don't want to bore you with legal technicalities. So any legal and any legal accountability is at a state and personal level. So, and I said this in Matopo a few years back, I think you were there, where I said, look, the government retains the responsibility of resolving Kukuraundi, regardless of who's in charge of government, regardless of the fact that the person who we may implicate is now in charge of government. So the hat that the president is wearing now is the hat of government. And he has a responsibility to resolve Kukuraundi with that hat, regardless of the fact that he may himself have been implicated. I hope you understand the difference. You can't then say, oh, no, you can't do it now. You can't do it now because you were there back then. We are saying, okay, you were there back then, but you still retain accountability because it was the government that did this, right? The government of the day. And the government of now inherits those responsibilities. Remember how we ended up in the land reform crisis? Mugabe was saying to the British, you promised to pay. And Blair and Clay Short were like, no, that wasn't us, that was Thatcher. It was Margaret Thatcher, sorry, we're not going to be paying land for your white people there. And Mugabe was like, are you mad? So are you saying that the government of Margaret Thatcher made a commitment that you are not going to meet or keep? I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. So there's so many legal issues around state responsibility. A state inherits the obligations of the previous state. That's why we still have the debt that Mugabe took. Of course, we've taken a whole lot more, but including from the Chinese. But you can't say, I'm sorry, I'm now a new government, I can't pay. It doesn't work like that. I mean, it simply doesn't. So we have to navigate this terrain very carefully. The government remains responsible and accountable to the people that were affected by Kukuraundi. And the government, regardless of whether it is the current president who's in charge, who many of us associate with that period, the responsibility doesn't change just because of that. And that then means that we now must then reflect on how then we engage with that process. Because you can't then say, no, but not you, you can't be there. But he's the president, so who's going to do it? I know it's provocative. I know some of you are like, yeah, njani. But I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. The question then becomes, as president, this is what we want you to do. You can't direct the issues for the following reasons. You must put in place a process that will be sincere, that will be independent, that will be free from your own interference and your own interest, so that we can have confidence in that process and trust in that process. So we have this process with the chiefs. The question is, how does one then insulate this process from any untoward interest or conflict of interest or abuse? And these are some things that one might want to think. Or some people might say, no, any process that comes from the government will never be acceptable. And that's also okay. It's a logical and acceptable position for people to take, right? You can take the position that this person will never be able to resolve this problem. And that's the position I've taken, by the way, for a very long time, that the government cannot resolve this process. They can't. They are implicated. And to the extent that they don't demonstrate a clear intention to allow the process to proceed without their interference, then the trust increasingly is eroded. But to the extent that they allow the process to happen and they remain open to whatever outcome, then the trust is enhanced. But we're putting these things on the table, right? There's people in the villages, as we speak here, who have their loved ones buried in a rock, under a rock over there, under a tree over there, and they've had to live with this reality for 20 years, many of them. And they are chiefs who are not appointed by the government, but who are there on the basis of tradition and culture, and who are hereditary. Nduna zabantu lezi aso nduna zikahulumende. And as much as governments from the Rhodesian times have always instrumentalized chiefs for politics, but the reality is that these chiefs are chiefs that are in their communities. And there is this process now, which on the face of it, if one says the glass is half empty, is like, no. Akusebenzi, will never work. If the glass is half full, the question is, well, how do we steer this process and support this process in a way, and insist, what are the kind of red lines, markers that we need to place to ensure that this process is as meaningful as possible for the people. I'm throwing this, and a lot of people have been asking, what do you think about this? My temptation was, when I reflected a bit, and I've read it over and over and over again, and I remain skeptical. I want to stress, and the skepticism comes from the fact that, as I said, it's taken so long, and the fact that there are so many mixed signals. 1 minute we have this process, the next minute plaques are being bombed in Balagwe. What the hell? Are you really serious about this process? So you can't tell people, talk about Kukuraundi, memorialize your loved ones, and then you put up a plaque, ilichenje, and then it's destroyed. it takes away. And I've tried to ask myself so many questions. Is this the same government? On a good day, I say, are people trying to sabotage Mnangagwa? On a good day, I'll say this. I say, but is it, what's going on here? And then on a bad day, I say, maybe this is Mnangagwa's script. On a good day, I'm like, no, man, but why is he going so far? Why is he saying the chiefs can do this? And why would somebody bomb a plaque in Slovela, in Palakwe? I'm like, it doesn't seem to make sense. And I'm sure many of us who have been working on Kukraondi just don't understand it. And these are the little things that continue to erode the credibility of anything and everything that the government does, right? Because there's no reason why that plaque in Balagwe can't be put up and can't be left alone. It's not going to hurt anybody. And mind you, you are saying the chiefs are in charge of this. How many chiefs were in Balagwe putting that plaque? Almost all of them were there. So what are you saying even to the chiefs? In Slovela, they all went that whole route, Nkai. All the chiefs are there when these things are happening. And then you are blowing that. And then you are saying, no, you are the one to resolve Kukraondi. What are you saying? So those are the things that continue to concern people, right? That continue to worry people. Can we trust this process? Are they being genuine? And if the government was to just be consistent on this, let people put up their plaques. Let people talk about it. You've already have a national process to say people can talk. They can tell their chiefs what happened. You have a national document that acknowledges that people were killed. They were raped. You have admitted it. Of course, you haven't yet apologized. That's fine, it will come. And maybe the apology will come when we know the full extent of what happened. It's too late, of course, but it will come, hopefully, or maybe it won't come. But right now, we have an opportunity to document. There are so many women who have never told their story. It's hard for a woman to say she's been raped. It's impossible, in fact, because of the way our society is. Not to mention the trauma. Maybe, and I'm saying absolutely maybe, this might be the opportunity to document everybody's story, with the caveat of the shortcomings that I've talked about, the suspicions, the worries, and the concerns. It might be the opportunity to address some of this, for people's stories to be told. And if that happens, that's a good thing, right? If, I'm saying if, but the opportunity has been presented here. The question then becomes, to what extent can the chiefs be enabled to do this? To what extent can we curb the instinct to control and manipulate this process? We all know that everybody has interest and they manipulate processes in any direction, including the government, it might. Given the fact that we are seeing this lack of clarity. 1 minute you're bombing plaques, 1 minute, no, let's resolve Kukraondi. So hopefully over time, given the fact that, and this is something else I need to say, I mean, Zenzele has spoken about this before, that it's not the first time that Mugabe talked about resolving Kukraondi. But to be fair to him, I think Mnangagwa has gone a little bit further. And I'm saying to be fair to him, given that he understands and knows that he's implicated himself. And that there could be so many reasons. And one could be that he genuinely wants to resolve this issue. One could be that he wants it resolved in a particular way, right? So there are so many possibilities. But those of us who have been on the trenches on this issue know that we have never gotten this far. And I'm not saying getting this far, we are happy with getting this far. We should even be further than here by now. Kukuraundi should have been resolved many years ago. So we're not excited and grateful and no, we're so grateful. No, we're not. We are like, you know what? Okay, get it. Let's see now. It's okay. Let's see. Let's really see. We don't owe that adulation at all. We still have too many people buried in unknown graves. We still have too many people whose stories are not told. It's long overdue and it has to happen. It's our right. It's not an entitlement to get justice for Kukuraundi. It's not. Nobody's doing us a favor. And we don't feel grateful to anybody for it. At least I'm speaking for myself. But we note the positive developments by the government of Zimbabwe, at least, which go beyond what we've always seen and heard. We still are concerned, of course, about the double messages. And we wonder whether there are people in government who don't want. In fact, we don't even wonder. We know that inside government there are people who may not even want this to happen. Because there are perpetrators there, right? Who might not know, who might be worried about how this will go. But we also know that it is possible to resolve things like this. They've been resolved in other countries before. Just leadership and a commitment to move a society past these moments will take the society past these moments. And maybe this is what we have. Maybe this is what we are seeing now. But we must push the government. We must not sit there and just be benevolent receivers of what the government gives you. Okay, here you are. This is a Kukuraundi process. We're going to do this and this and that. Thank you. No. You have to ask the questions. What about this? I'm still worried about you. Mr. President, are you genuine? What about this? What about that? We have to ask those questions because we want to carry ourselves along this process with the trust and confidence that it is a process that is going to take us to the end, right? So, and I say this, I guess advisedly, that this is how I'm choosing to see this opportunity. A younger me would have been blatantly dismissive, but here I'm just cautiously, I don't want to use optimistic, I'm just cautiously observant and maybe hopeful. But a lot of things will have to change for this to take us to where we want to go. And I guess the people of Matabeleland would have to insist on their voice being heard, on the story being told. They will have to insist, not just to the government, but to their own chiefs, that you cannot, in our village, we lost these people. We want to see them in a document. The document that finally records everybody that we lost. We want to see, there has to be ultimately at the end, I hope, a clearer picture of what Kukuraundi was. And everybody has to see the names. You know, if you go to the Holocaust Museum, if you go to Rwanda, there's pictures. You've seen those pictures. There's names, pictures of people. Some of them nobody knows where they are, but the families brought the pictures and they've stuck them on the wall. You've seen that. If you go to Tusleng, I went to Tusleng prison in Cambodia. Pol Pot, if those of you who are old enough will remember, there was a terrible dictator called Pol Pot. He killed over 1 million of his people in a genocide. And he had a prison, a terrible prison, where he kept people and he killed people. Not unlike Balakwe, but it was in the city in Phnom Penh. And if you go to Tusleng prison, you'll see the walls. It's not a museum. The walls of Tusleng have pictures of all the people that died there. And many of our people have pictures of their loved ones. But it's important that those pictures are known. Some don't even have pictures, but some do. Even if it's a blank picture with a name underneath, that's enough. It puts your relative there. right? It allows him to be here or him to be recognized as one of the victims of Kukraundi. And it's absolutely critical that every village, every villager, every victim has a chance. Forget the villages, another thing that we must take into account. Kukraundi didn't only happen in the villages. Kukraundi happened in the city. It was an operation. People forget that Kukraundi was an operation. Stops camp was full of people who were being tortured. Some of them were being killed there at Stops camp. People were being moved around. People were being taken from houses in the townships. So this is another shortcoming about that process, which people must point out. In entrusting chiefs, how are you going to capture what happened in the cities? So everybody must now go back to the village to tell their story of what happened when they came to take their relative in Popoma. Didn't happen there. So these are some of the things that I guess people who work on these issues, activists, even people here in Bulawayo, need to say, what about us? We all got stories. We all have something to say. Because they were taking people from everywhere. Kukraundi didn't just happen in the villages. Please, let's not forget that. It happened here. Here in Bulawayo, thousands of people were taken, detained, and disappeared from town. So how do we capture that? I'm just talking here without doing in-depth analysis, but these are the questions you put. How do we address those things? And these are then opportunities to then refine the processes, to engage this process. Okay, if it was done in this way, it would work. I've also read the manual. I like that manual. It's a good manual on helping the chiefs engage the villages, the people, the victims. It's a good manual because, mind you, we make an assumption that people have skills to lead, to conduct processes. They don't. I know chiefs in some villages who, if you have committed an offense, they'll say, okay, lie down here, and then they'll beat you. It's not a really nice way of resolving issues. Of course, villagers don't take it anyway. They just leave. Then they go home. But it's not really, but it's useful to the chiefs don't have these skills necessarily. Some do, but these are complex processes. You need professionals under normal circumstances to undertake a process, and we are going to need professionals to support the chiefs. The government is going to need to put money and invest in this process, because how do you document? We're not talking about asking somebody on an afternoon to just tell their story and then go home. That story has to have a follow-up, consequences. That's why we're documenting it, so that there's action, follow-up action afterwards. So it's not like you're going there and chatting with the chief. So there's going to have to be careful, clear capacities to document the story in its full entirety, so that it is ultimately compiled. And then the government is then given this full account from the chiefs that this is what happened. This is what you need to resolve. And that requires capacity and support. That is for somebody who chooses to see the glass half full. For somebody who chooses to see the glass half empty, then there's no point. Because, of course, they have no capacity to do this. They have no skills to do it. They have no competence to do it. And this is by no means to demean the chiefs. I'm an international criminal lawyer, and to navigate the issues is complex. Up to now, there's been a raging debate on whether Kukraundi was a genocide or not. I spent a greater part of the past couple of years trying to answer that question. And I'm glad to say that I think I have. But it's a complex question. And many other scholars might come up with a different conclusion to the conclusion that I've come to. But a scholarly analysis requires one to go into a search. It's a different process. Now, let alone a chief who doesn't have the level of sophistication legally, even in criminal proceedings, for example, the elements of a crime. It's a complex thing. You know, what are the elements of a crime? What are the elements of rape, for example? And I'll illustrate in one simple thing. So, the complexity of it, right? So under the law, rape, this is just an example. Under the law, rape is sex without consent, right? And consent, so it's coercive sex. And when an inquiry is being made where rape has been reported in a criminal process, the inquiry is around whether there was consent. Was the sexual intercourse preceded by consent? And half the time, it is a defense in rape to say there was consent. It's a full defense. If it is accepted that there was consent, there is no rape. Now, you have, and this is a clearly established jurisprudential point. Under international law, in instances of atrocity, rape associated with atrocity, this is rape associated with a genocide, rape associated with a crime against humanity, or rape associated with a war crime. There's a nuance to that principle. A coercive environment, do you hear what I'm saying? A coercive environment creates a context for rape. So, what do I mean? If you are occupying Cholocho, the military is there in Cholocho for 3-4 months, and they come and they take young girls and women to the camp to cook, and they sleep with them, they have sex with them, no conversation, and the women don't say no. That is rape. There can be no defense that says they never said no. I hope you're understanding the nuance. If you have somebody in captivity, under your custody and your control, even if they willingly have sex with you, they are not willingly having sex with you. Does it make any sense what I'm saying? Okay, so it becomes clear, right, what I'm trying to say in terms of nuancing. And some of these are technical issues, right? Because somebody can argue that, but hatina kumamanikidza. We went there, we had sex, they agreed. And it has happened in many instances. Even peacekeepers have been accused in some countries of using the fact that they are keeping peace. I mean, imagine you go to a place like Central African Republic, you are the UN peacekeeping force. You are there, there's a civil war, and now you are keeping peace in these villages, and then you are having sex with these young girls there. I mean, where's the consent? For goodness sake, there's no consent there. The whole environment is coercive. The context is toxic. The women are not able to give consent. They have no capability. Consent must be free. So I'm just giving this nuance. And I'm giving it as a way of explaining the complexity of some of these issues. So to cut a long story short, it's quite clear that chiefs would have to be supported. in many ways. And I know there's already efforts to support them, and I know the government envisages that. I saw the manual, I read it. And looking beyond my own skepticism, if this is going to work, then certainly they will need that support. They will need support to capture the stories of the people properly, accurately, comprehensively, because those stories have to be captured, as Shari did in Breaking the Silence, in a way that those stories, action can be taken positively on them. How much time do I have? Should I wind up, or do I have a little bit more time? Okay, so I'll shift from the chief's conversation and just say, I guess as I move towards the winding up, so I'll go back to where I started, which was what naming things, right? And then I will then end my presentation. So one thing for sure is that in my own analysis and in trying to classify legally Kukuraundi in the most objective and dispassionate way, given that I have my biases, but I guess it did help that I also worked as an international criminal lawyer. And the hat I wore in my previous life, some of you might actually disown me when you hear this, is that I actually defended perpetrators of atrocities. That was the job I did. I know you, okay. Yeah, I know. I actually one day offered to defend Mugabe if ever he was prosecuted for Kukuraundi, because that's a job I used to do. And not because I believe he's innocent, but because I believe that he has a right to be defended, and that he may not necessarily be accountable for everything that people say he's accountable for. And that is important, that somebody is held accountable only for the things they have done. And I believe very strongly about this. I will defend you. So I'll defend you in any case. If you come to me and you say, I've done this, okay, let's see, okay. So I used to defend, so in my previous life, I used to defend militia leaders who committed atrocities. And it helped me a lot, right? It helped me understand that the commission of atrocities is never an individual enterprise. I hope you understand what I'm saying. Nobody wakes up one morning, unless you're a nutcase like we usually see in Texas. Somebody gets up and gets a gun and goes to a school and shoots children, or goes to a mall and eventually shoots himself or something like that. I mean, I don't want to call them nutcases. I have to be very careful. But in truth, unless you are that, what distinguishes atrocities from normal crimes, ordinary crimes, which is a distinguishing factor for Kukuraundi, is three distinct elements. The first is the scale, right? The scale of the crime. And scale is really about size, right? The scale is about size. It's how pervasive, how prevalent, how expansive, how wide a crime is. I'm trying to master all my vocabulary. It's a distinguishing factor for atrocity. whether it is genocide you're talking about, or a crime against humanity, or a war crime. So numbers matter, right? When you're looking at scale, how many people are affected by it? How many people are victims of it? The geographic coverage matters, right? Geographic coverage. What area is it covering? It's not a small little one corner of a country or one district or one village. It is across an expansive entire province, right? So scale matters. Scale is also related to, I'll come to the question of the resources that go into perpetrating the crime, that are invested in the planning, but that's a separate category. The second one, apart from scale, is the gravity. Gravity is really, in other words, the seriousness. And gravity is in the method of perpetration, is in the impact on the victims. So that's a distinguishing factor for a normal crime and what you'd call an atrocity crime, which is what we then call international crimes, whether it is genocide or crimes against humanity or war crimes. Gravity, the seriousness of the offense. It's not an ordinary murder. It is multiple murders, mass murders, committed in the most gruesome ways, using the same methods, aimed at perpetrating and spreading terror, etc. So gravity is a very critical thing. The third and most important is, not most important, equally important, is the question of the level and the organization of the perpetrators. It's a very important element that distinguishes a normal crime and what we call a collective or system crime. I hope I'm making some sense here. So crimes are committed by individuals. Crimes can be committed by groups. And a distinguishing factor of atrocity crimes is the fact that they are system crimes. So we have what we call system criminality, that there is a system. And this was what this concept, without going into too much detail, originated from the Nuremberg post-Nazi Holocaust, where the tribunal had to figure out that how do we try these people? How do we attribute responsibility to this Nazi system? Because you can go to one person, but there was a system behind. There was a plan, when they planned to kill all the Jews, put them in concentration camps, make them work, forced labor camps, sterilize the women. It was an elaborate plan, right? Hate speech, get the newspapers, Julius Strecher with his propaganda, Goebbels. It was a system, an unbelievable system. The judges were working also in the system. The industrialists were working in the system, because the industrialists, the people who owned the factories, the people who were working in these factories for free were Jews. Working for free, forced labor. So industrialists were there doing this, part of this big system. The politicians were coming up with the ideology and the agenda. The intelligence, the Stasi, all these people were coming in. Everybody was bringing in a little bit of something there, you understand? The system. And the crime is committed by a system. So these are a very important distinguishing factor. And these are technical, but nuances, right? So we have to accept and understand that Kukraundi wasn't an isolated thing. Even as we say Mnangagwa was there, and whoever else was there, Mugabe was there, we must understand this from a perspective of a collective crime. This was a collective crime, which also had individual criminal responsibility, but it was a collective crime. The entire system, ZANU, from the party to the government. And then, of course, the level and organization, you then begin to understand and analyze how much went into planning, how much went into resourcing, how much went into implementing. This is what gives you an idea when you are analyzing whether this was a random act or this was a system, a collective act, right? So, and there are many ways of actually analyzing this and deciding whether some of these tests are met. What was the size of the deployment of the brigade? What was the size of its resourcing? What was the period of its deployment? What was the instructions, tacit, implied, or actual, that were given to the brigade? And there's many, many instances where you can actually see, whether from Mugabe himself giving instructions to the brigade. And I say this because it's so critical that as one is trying to resolve, one must accept and understand that who is literally on the block is the system. It is easy to essentialize it and say, well, we have Mnangagwa over there. But forget that. Mnangagwa was just one person in that system. He might happen now to be the only person that you can all throw stones at because he's now the president as well. But that was a system issue. And if you trace my Baba there, Paul Tembanyati is there, and he will tell you, he knows. The whole thing was a system and planned. And if you are reckoning with it, reckon with that, right? But that doesn't mean that there are no individuals who are responsible within that system. So, and it's important from a legal perspective, if you are analyzing it. I'm winding up now. So these are some of the nuances. It of course doesn't mean that system crimes cannot be resolved. But it's absolutely critical to understand that what differentiates a normal and ordinary crime from a system crime or an international crime are those elements: scale, gravity, level, and organization of perpetrators. And whether something is a genocide, a crime against humanity, and war crime is also dependent on the facts. And in my own research in the past couple of years, I've come to the conclusion, which I substantiate, and I would be happy at the right time for people who have alternative views or who have critique on how the conclusions I've reached. I've come to the conclusion that Kukuraundi meets the legal requirements for classification as a genocide. And I explain why. I put all the evidence. I analyze all the genocide. I analyze all the case law in all the tribunals from Nuremberg. Well, Nuremberg never tried genocide as genocide, even though the crime was actually created in 1948 by Lemkin, Raphael Lemkin, and the convention was adopted by the UN in 1948. It was never tried in Nuremberg as genocide. It was first tried as genocide in the International Criminal Tribunal in Yugoslavia, and then Rwanda, and of course the International Criminal Tribunal, International Criminal Court, ICC. So I've reached the conclusion, which I justify, that Kukuraundi was a genocide. And I explain why. I spoke about this last year, so I'm not going to repeat. And there are consequences to such a conclusion and such a finding, right? And this is something that has to be contended with as well. So what are the implications of something being a genocide? Under national law, under international law. And in fact, Zimbabwe has a Genocide Act. I don't know if people know this. Zimbabwe has a Genocide Act. Did you know that? You don't know? Yes, there's a Genocide Act. It was enacted in 2000. I was surprised to find it. I was shocked, actually, to find it. It came into force on the 16th of June in 2000. And its current legislation, I was completely shocked. I almost fell off my chair when I discovered that Zimbabwe has a Genocide Act. And the Genocide Act is a perfect act. There's a few things that, as all laws are, but we have a Genocide Act. And the fascinating thing about the act is that it was crafted in a clever way, of course, as all acts are. And the act provides that it's not applicable to anything that happened before it came into force, which is 2000. That's the most creative aspect of this act. And in truth, there is a legal principle. Nulla crimen sine lege, those who are lawyers here in the room will relate. And nullam crimen sine lege means you cannot punish something that's not a crime at the time that somebody does it. But they are fascinating. Anyway, I discussed this in my research, and so when you do get to read it, you will see. There are fascinating nuances or debates around what the implications of this caveat that says the law only applies to crimes that occurred after 2000. There hasn't been any genocide we've seen more recently after 2000, but that's the first thing that the law says. So there are shortcomings to the law which are challengeable very easily. I think I've spoken about this in other fora as well when I talked about this act. So that's the first thing that's in the act, that it doesn't apply to crimes that happened before it came into force, 2000. And of course, that provision is itself illegal. I'm sorry to say this, unfortunately. I don't think the crafters of the law understood that you can't decriminalize something that was already a crime when you committed it. Do you hear what I'm saying? In 1982, 1983, I can't remember when Zimbabwe signed up to the Genocide Convention and all the other, anyway, I heard it at some point. But anyway, the long and the short is that in 1983, genocide was already a crime under international law. And it was already a crime under customary international law. And customary international law binds everybody, including those who have not signed up to a particular convention. So it was a way to try to go around it, but not really a meaningful and successful way, which would ultimately need to be litigated in some place. I mean, somebody would have to argue. We've had instances where these things have arisen in Argentina, in Sierra Leone. Of course, the big legal issue is the Amnesty Ordinance 11 of 1988, which gave everybody an amnesty for what happened in Kukraondi. The big question is, what are the implications of that amnesty? Under international law, there are no amnesties for international crimes, but we have to accept and understand that amnesties have been an effective and useful way to help countries move past these periods. It's not cast in stone, But international law is quite clear about the legality of amnesties under international law. That is why in the Special Court for Sierra Leone, in the, I think a case of Calon, the court rejected the fascinating thing, the court rejected an amnesty that had been given by ECOWAS. ECOWAS, to stop the war in Sierra Leone, called all the parties for Day Sanko and all those people to Lome in Togo, and they all signed an agreement and it gave everybody an amnesty. But later on, the Special Court for Sierra Leone said, no, we don't recognize that. But we do have an amnesty. It was a blanket amnesty, those of you who may remember. So these are some of the nuances. And then just to wind up, I also came to the conclusion that the requirements for crimes against humanity were also met. And really, oh, sorry, I haven't finished about the Genocide Act. So I said there was that one issue of applicability after 2000. There's two others. The second one is that you need the authorization of the Attorney General to prosecute anybody for genocide in Zimbabwe. I guess by and large the Attorney General has prosecutorial discretion, but there is no such legal requirement globally. A crime has been committed, it remains a crime. You don't need the Attorney General to decide whether it's a crime or not. I hope you understand what I'm saying. But the Genocide Act specifically says that you cannot prosecute genocide unless the Attorney General allows you to. You can prosecute attempts to genocide, but not genocide itself. You need the Attorney General, and you know what that means, right? There's no Attorney General who's going to let you prosecute it. And then there's a couple of other things in that act. For example, it prescribes the penalties. It says that the penalty for an act of genocide is the same as the penalty for murder. I don't think it explicitly says murder with actual intent, because there's a whole range in which it say life. Does it say life imprisonment or whatever? I can't remember. But it's a bit odd to have to prescribe a penalty as well, right? Even though many of the people that have been convicted for genocide in the ad hoc international criminal tribunals, none of them have ever been sentenced to death, because there's no death penalty in those tribunals. I'm winding up. I've been told I need to wind up. So, comrades, I guess that is all. I've drawn the conclusion that Kukuraundi was a genocide, was crimes against humanity, and it also was war crimes, by the way. And I explain and justify my findings. But ultimately, whatever it was, it has to be resolved. Some people might argue you are wasting time doing all this scholarly analysis. Why are you doing this? I mean, why don't you just do other things? But I guess when you have time, you have time. And also, it's absolutely important that things are analyzed and captured. Whatever happens to the analysis, others might have different views about it, different thoughts. But we all owe a duty to play our small little part in contributing to the discourse and the discussion, in helping enliven the debates, in making sure that people are making informed choices about the options that they might have, but that the choices are also informed by a real understanding of what they are talking about. That we're not talking about disturbances. We're talking about genocide and crimes against humanity and war crimes. That's the seriousness and the gravity. And we are talking about a system that committed crimes, not Emerson Mnangagwa. It's easy. We can say, yes, it's Mnangagwa because he's there now, right? Everybody's also gone, Mugabe. But it's a system. And in unpacking it, let the system take responsibility. Because that's the system, they did this, right? under the guise of destroying ZAPU. They killed Ndebeles. They failed to distinguish who's a ZAPU supporter. Anybody who was a ZAPU supporter in Matabeleland was deemed. And consequently, the system took this decision, not shown us, the system in power. And we must differentiate this as well. And the law does, right? And the system must take responsibility for it and for accountability for it. Because there were people sitting in villages in Zarabani who didn't know what was happening. So, thank you so much. I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
Thank you so much for that. So if you'd like to share a contribution, a question or anything, please just raise your hand and I'll come. It said to me that she wanted to ask a question. So I'll start with Slovo, who is sitting behind me. You can go ahead.
Okay. It's not really a question, but it's a comment on such an enlightening discussion. I think from the discussion, I appreciate the concept of a cup that is half full and half empty, because with the launch of the Kokurahundi hearings, people then responded, we live in a country where the government is mistrusted. It isn't trusted. So therefore, anything that they decide to lead, it then means that the people won't believe in it. They know that there's a particular system that is going to manipulate the processes or whatsoever. But I kind of appreciate that analysis then of then saying that there are people who are skeptical about what is happening, and there are people who are also optimistic. And I feel like the optimism then will sort of encourage even the victims of Kokurahundi to even come forth and be able to talk about what it is that happened. So I feel like we shouldn't, what has already been said, we shouldn't be skeptical about these processes, because there are people who still need to heal. So I think I liked that concept of then giving the story two sides. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Slovo. Anyone else? All right.
Ngiyabonga ukuphiwa leli thuba. Ngilombuzo lapha ingaba mbili. Oqala nje ngithanda ukwazi ukuthi le system esikhuluma ngayo le mhlambe sidila ngayo isystem eyiyo esiphenduke mhlambe esizo resolve lokho eyakwenza inenhloso. Ngoba masikhuluma siqale sidefine igama elithi ikukurahundi kusho ukuthini? Kusho ukuthi it's a kusho ukuthi kuyindlela yokuza cleaner ingcekeza eyayikhona ngithi ngendlela okwakubekwe ngayo ngolimi lwesishona nxa utolika, right? Bese sithi khona ebuzwa eseDavos yena uEmerson uyabuzwa ngodaba lweGugurahundi uthi uzaxolisa yini lo mama ombuzayo. Impendulo yakhe bisithi if need be. So singathi siloku thandabuza khona phana. Okwesibili bese kusiba lo daba lokuthi kulodaba lokuthi khona let bygones be bygones. Nguye lo futhi othi kaku resolve. How do you resolve ama bygones? Then okwesithathu bese kusiba yikho khona lokho okukhulunywa uziyambi abese sithi uperpetrator umgabe wa resolve udaba leGugurahundi. So imbuzo emithathu khona lapha ngifisa ukuzwisisa ukuthi kanti the same government nxa ukhulunywa ngoziyambi emelelo yona leyo government ekhuluma kwi-international fora chasisa lokho ukuthi khona kwahamba njani ngodaba lolo nxa sesikhuluma ngodaba lolo. Kukhanya ngathi kukhona okwenziwayo okudlalwayo o hide and seek. Ngibona njalo ngendlela engibona ngayo. Ngiyabonga.
let me just try and answer because there's 3 questions before I forget. So, yeah, ngiyakuzwa baba. So ngizaphendula isindebele bese ngiphendula ngesilungu ukwenzela ukuthi abangasizwi isindebele. Okokuqala into mele sibambisise sizwisise la. Singathandabuzi ngayo ukuthi udaba lokuground asidingi kuzwa ngomunye umuntu ukuthi kuyini okufanele kwenzakala. Angithi so ngithi mina asizwa ngabo ukuthi kuza kwenzakalani. Kodwa akutsho ukuthi nxa kuvuleke umzila okuyicubungula asisondeli duze. Yiwumbono wami lo. Kodwa sizwa ngabo abangeke bebe yibo abasitshelayo ukuthi udaba lokuground luzalungiswa njani. Bona beyibo ababuya bazofeza ikuground. Yiyo nje kuphela into engayitsho ekuqaleni. Vele akuvumakali. Yiko ngiqale ngakukhuluma ekuqaleni ngisithi insolo esilayo ukuthi abantu laba ababuya besebezolungisa indaba le yibo abantu ababuya bezobhuqilizwa. So siyathandabuza ukuthi kati bangabe behlosena ngithi. Kodwa lokubuya kwabo lokho akutsho ukuthi thina sesikuvumile konke abakutshoyo labaza kutsho. So kumele ukuthi thina sikhethe ukuthi ekulungiseni indaba yeground kuyini esikuvumayo kuyini esingakuvumi. Kuyini esikufunayo kuyini esingakufuniyo as victims of ground. Okwesibili kusobala ukuthi bygones be bygones mbona ngani asisekho kuyi. Wakutsho sibili umongameli ukuthi let bygones be bygones. Abantu bathi ama bygones lawa ngawakho. Ozathi bygones wena walethe goa wakho kodwa thina ama bygones ethu sisawabambili. Yiko kwenza ukuthi sibe lapha sesikhona. Loba singasuthiseki ngalapha esikhona kodwa bygones be bygones abantu bamtshela bathi ngawakho la ama bygones azaba ngama bygones. Ngoba ngalo bana wayesithi wayeqine ngalokho ngakasikho la. Ngoba indaba le wakubona ukuthi hayi bygones abantu abayibambi abayivumi. So wothi ngibone ukuthi ngingenzani. Kumbe lokho akwenzayo kwenele akwenelanga sizatsho thina abanikazi anti. Sizatsho ukuthi okay ubusithini kanti. Hayi asenze siyakuzwa. Hayi lokho asivumi lokho siyavuma. So singabamba thina bygones be bygones. Wakutsho sibili lokho lami ngethuka eseDavos ngathi yebo hayi kodwa kumangalisanga futhi. Ngoba kwakuvele kufanele. Ngoba abantu umkabe basayinela lo nkomo kwathiwa kulama amnesty. Bona basitshela ukuthi vele ama bygones kudala aba ngama bygones. Dika bezitshela khona. Kodwa thina sithi hayi lokho ngokweni lokho. Akula ama bygones la. Okugcina hayi uzihambi asazi. Ukuthi nje uzami ukuyithathele phezulu ngithi. Ngake ngamtshela nje la ukuthi uyithathele phezulu ku social media ukuthi hayi zihambi. Usike wayithathela phezulu. Ungaze ngimkhombisa hayi ungabala lokhu hayi. Ingxenye inkunye ngathi kancane kungani yaphela. Hayi akukubanga ngoba la angithi ungumholi la kuhulumende la uzama la ukwenza umsebenzi wakhe. Kodwa akukubanga vele ngoba sibona izinto ngendlela ezijiyeneyo. La yokuprogram la yayifakwe ukuthi hayilungisa indaba le la uzama la yokwenza khonokho kodwa hayi ubona ngendlela yakhe thina umsebenzi wethu ube sike simkhipha inkunga ngithi hayi lapho lahlekile mana awukwazi lokho sesikutshela thina kumbe hayi lapho uqinisile, lapho right, lapho wrong. Khona ukusho ukuthi indaba le ya resolve ngokwakhe lokho, ya resolve mbani. Into ehlala ngimangalisa ngabantu ukuthi sesitshona silele singalele. Libonto uzihamba utheni limzuzu. Abantu sebetshona ku Twitter lapana ku social media. Bechinga. Sesingezwe ngozihambi namhlanje kambe sure. So long and short, to just answer in English. So my point is that yes, at some point at the beginning of his presidency, President Mnangagwa did say let bygones be bygones. But it does seem that there's been a shift in the thinking and the position. I know that let bygones be bygones was an early period of his presidency. And what I think he has also clearly realized is that this is not an easy issue to push away and to ignore. And my own sense is looking at what has happened from the collective to him coming so many times to Matabeleland is that he shifted his thinking. He's shifted his thinking to actually engaging this issue and trying to address it. Whether successful or not, the jury is still out. But we are no longer in the let bygones be bygones stage, in my opinion. What I see is a clear shift on the part of the government, at least on the part of the president himself, because this seems to be one of those things that he himself is doing. I mean, he comes himself to have meetings with the chiefs. He doesn't delegate this one. And in a way, it's good. And in a way, it's also unsettling, right? It's good and unsettling for people that are engaging him. Okay, so how do we deal with this? But we're no longer in the bygones be bygones, in my opinion. I could be wrong. I haven't heard him say this again since that time and since the pushback from the people. And the last point was on the statement by Ziambi that Kukraondi was resolved. A clear contradiction. If Kukraondi was resolved, we wouldn't have had the president here last week. So Ziambi has his prerogative to say what he wants, but he has no prerogative on fact. You know, it's his own opinions about many of the things, and sometimes his opinions are not entirely legally and factually correct. So but they are still his opinions. And we are entitled to challenge them. And he is also entitled to hold them and express them. And that's fine. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Malunga, I just have a concern. I'm very glad that you've brought forward the legal aspect of Kukuraundi. We've never really looked at it from that aspect. Now, I was a little saddened and disheartened when you said that this was a systematic approach to the problem. It was an entire system, meaning there were judges involved, there were senior police officers, there were army personnel, all arms of government were involved in this genocide. Now, you raised a point to say that it is difficult to apportion individual responsibility for this thing. Now, with the passage of time, we are almost 40 years since this thing happened. My question now is, are we ever going to see anyone being brought to court or charges being brought forward to an individual to account for Kukuraundi? Thank you.
That's a great question. Can you hear me? That's a great question. What I didn't say because of time is that in my research, I also actually devote time to individual responsibility. So, under international law, it's clear. The consequences of committing an international crime is that there is a legal duty under international law. There is a legal duty to investigate, prosecute, and punish perpetrators of international crimes. It's clear. Under international law, there is no debate, no question about it. That is the implication of finding that an international crime has been committed. And there is also individual criminal responsibility for the commission of an international crime. So the fact that it's a collective crime or a system crime doesn't negate the individual responsibility of perpetrators. It simply explains the nature of the crime. So a system crime is best captured as what is called under international law a joint criminal enterprise. I'll give you an example. And I'll give you an example close to home. How mine? Those people went and robbed that truck. So there's the people who went there, ambushed the truck, took the gold. I don't know if they killed anybody. I think the previous How Mine robbery people were killed. And then they take the gold away and they run away and they're caught. There's somebody else who planned it. The people who committed may not have planned it. They may have been part of the planning. They could be a mastermind. And the mastermind never goes anywhere usually. He's sitting at home there. He's the master planner. He's already got contacts in How Mine. He analyzes the information. He knows that it leaves at 3 a.m. He's a mastermind. He doesn't go anywhere near. And he analyzes, he knows what they need, if they need explosives to blow open that truck, if they need guns. The mastermind knows the guns that the security people have, so they have to be more powerful guns. Mastermind doesn't move. And the mastermind also funds the whole thing sometimes. Sometimes the mastermind doesn't, it's just a criminal. And then there's somebody who says, okay, here's the money, go and buy the car, buy this, buy that, buy that. And then there's somebody who parks the car along the road, sends a message, right? And then there's somebody else who has another car further up so they can change the car. He's not there when they kill these people or when they rob. And then there's somebody where the gold is stashed. And then there's somebody else who moves the gold. And then there's somebody else who... Anyway, the long and the short is, each and every one of those people are individually responsible. But that entire group is also responsible as a group. That's, for me, the explanation of system criminality. It's the simplest, a bank robbery or a robbery of this nature. The fact that it's a group does not negate the responsibility of one. So, if you were parked and all you did was to tell them, you didn't shoot a gun, you didn't do anything, they kill those guards and they take that gold, you will be charged with robbery and murder. You hear what I'm saying? You are not going to be charged with phoning those people to tell them that the car passed. You can't. You were part of the joint criminal enterprise. And so you take responsibility for everything that happens in that. Why this is important from a legal perspective in attributing criminal responsibility is that Mugabe will say, you never saw me in Cholocho. When did you see me killing anybody? Because Mugabe was sitting there as Prime Minister wearing his suit. The most you could do is you could say, but you came and you addressed a rally and you said, you need to choose. Will you die? Will you live? You instigated, you aided, you abetted. These are legal terms. You encouraged. But we can conclude that he was part of the planning because he went and signed that agreement with the Koreans. He signed it. He sent these people for training in Yanga. He was there at the passing out parade. He gave them an instruction. He continued to encourage them. and he was told that there were crimes being committed, and he did nothing. He ridiculed. You can also be held accountable for doing nothing, especially if you have a legal duty to do something. It differs. So there are layers and layers of accountability and responsibility. If you create a dangerous situation, you assume criminal responsibility for the consequences of that situation. Uzafaka swimming pool ungafaki net ulabantwana. Umntwana sengena segalula, ubusista ngenzanga lutho. Awenzanga lutho njani? Ecrash ufaka swimming pool ungafaka amanet. You have created a dangerous situation. Or if you have a prisoner in your custody, you are a police officer in charge. You have a duty to ensure that prisoner is safe by virtue of your role. If you are a teacher in a class, etc., etc. So there are many different layers of criminal responsibility. So I might not have clarified it, but there is both individual and collective responsibility.
All right, so unfortunately, due to time constraints, I know there are so many hands and so many questions from everyone, but I know that Usipo is open to answering questions even in person as we interact. So we'll have to shut down this session for now, but a round of applause for Siphosami Malunga for coming through and dropping gems for us. And just to let you know, Guti will be having refreshments in the veranda over there. So I think we'll start from the end over there. So Amalama braids, you can be the first one just to lead the way to Ama refreshments. And please do feel free to interact and network. And thank you so much once again for coming through for this public lecture.